We started this committee in 2006, 18 years ago. And we realized this year that it was a kind of a late start, since sports and athletics at Columbia High School go way earlier than that. And we recognized that there were super athletes that we kind of overlooked who had excelled back in the 50s, 50 years before we even started the committee. So we decided at the outset we were going to honor some of those wonderful athletes that we kind of overlooked for the past 18 or so years. And so the first order of business is I'm going to bring up the founder of our group, our committee, Harvey Weisbard, whose idea it was to start this. Harvey is probably the fastest runner in the history of Columbia High School. He's also a great attorney, great judge, but he is the one that I would like to introduce those people from the 50s who merit recognition at this point. So Harvey, please come on up.
The first of our honorees, and this really tonight, it's a poignant moment for me, because talk about overlooking someone. Back in 2016, we inducted Phil Hartung. Now I'm going to call them, I think they actually, the current Phil, who you'll meet in a minute, maybe is the third, but I'm going to call them son and father. Phil was a super weight thrower, and we inducted him, and at that time, and I fault myself, I never thought about the opportunity to have inducted a father and son team, because young Phil, who's not that young anymore, although pretty good looking guy, we should have not only inducted the father and son at that time, but sadly, now that we're trying to rectify that by inducting our prior inductee's father from the class of 52, he passed away in the meantime, since young Phil was inducted in 2016. So that makes it kind of a sad event. But in any event, the person we're here to recognize, Phil Hartung, class of 1952, I'm not going to go through his achievements because you've got that in the booklet, and we're not here to just read what's there. But I just missed him in terms of the Columbia High School track team, because he was a senior and had just graduated when I came in as a sophomore. You remember there was only 3-year high school at that time. And even then, Phil Hartung was a legend. He dominated the shot put and discus, and as you've seen in the write-up, he was county champion several years in a row, and then in his senior year, he was a first and a second place winner in the Group 4 championships. Now, also remember, for those of you that don't know this, in those days, there was no meet of champions. Each person competed in their own group, and the closest we had to any anointing of a state champion would be to compare the times or distances of the people in the various groups in that same event and self-anoint someone as being the best of the group. But Phil was a dominant figure, and he was warranted, as you probably saw. It wasn't until I think it was 9 years later, after he graduated, that someone finally broke his records, another of our inductees, Bob Richwood. And then his records were broken by the son, who's going to be coming up here in a moment to accept on behalf of his father. So Phil Hartung was a giant, both in the terms of his achievements and in his size, as was his son. And it's my great pleasure to rectify this failure on our part and induct the father of our first father and son team of inductees. Phil?
Hello, Columbia High School Athletic Hall of Fame. Let me tell you, it certainly is wonderful to be back here again. And before I get started with all of this, a couple of shout outs I got to do. Number one are my three sisters, Jane, Jennifer, and Heather, who are here to help honor our dad tonight. Hello. And at the same table is a longtime friend who got this whole ball rolling for our family about 8 years ago. Without that initial nudge, I probably wouldn't be standing up here. So I want to give a big thank you to my fellow 79er, Jimmy Madden, for making this possible. Thank you, Jimmy. Okay, and here goes this, and if all goes well, it should be done in about 4 minutes. I'll try not to put you to sleep. All right. I'll talk fast.
I said 3.
Okay.
I'm getting to be like Judge Mershon.
It is a pleasure to be here once again. This time, of course, to do the honors for my dad as we become the first father and son in the Hall of Fame. And let me tell you, our dad was not overly enthused by a whole heck of a lot. When we were kids, our nickname for him was actually Oscar the Grouch. But one thing for sure is that he loved Columbia High School. And because Columbia and throwing and my dad are pretty much the reason I'm standing up here right now, that's where I'm going to begin. Since we were both throwers, it should come as no great surprise that we had strangely similar careers. And there are two things in particular that meant a lot to my dad. Number one was that we both left Columbia as a school record holder in both the shot and disc. Those records, he considered those to be ours, and he wanted them in our family. And as promised, number two, and this one just tickled him to no end, according to longtime New Jersey field and track guru, Ed Grant, we are the only father and son in New Jersey ever to be state champions for the same school in the same event, in which case that's the discus. I realize that's not a bit of field and track trivia, but it made the old man happy, so I'm okay with that. So now that I'm done with the we, let me tell you about the he. Let me tell you about my dad. Picture a high school senior these days who is 6'4", 235 pounds. You're looking at a big, good-sized teenager who's going to probably eat you out of house and home. Now, picture that same size kid, but in 1952. To point out the obvious, he was a large dude, wore glasses, and was described in various articles and yearbook entries as, the big fella, little guy, Maplewood's big man, and my favorite, the bespectacled mammoth. Now, oddly, he got into throwing purely by accident. He said that one day when he was a sophomore, he was walking down a hall, and a coach, noting his size, asked him if he had ever thrown before. By his own admission, believe it or not, he didn't know what those events really were. But in the spring of 1950, he dutifully showed up to Underhill to go to practice, and then a year later, set his first school record in the disc. He added the school record in the shot put in April of 1952, when he threw 54 feet, 11 inches, which I found out, and it's on the board back there, that was the 10th best throw in the nation that year. When I told him about that in the summer of 2019, he said, I knew I was good, but not that good. So he was modest also. All right. One of the things that was so funny about him is how he was rather secretive about his throwing success at Columbia. He didn't dredge up his past accomplishments or morph into like a 4 touchdowns Al Bundy kind of person. I'd ask him how far he threw. He'd say he didn't remember. I'd ask him how he did in a particular meet, and he would shrug his shoulders and just say, I won more than I lost. Yeah, he did. Well, I know that he was pleased with what he did as an athlete at Columbia. But as the saying goes, a man's legacy is not what he does, but rather what he leaves. And his is pretty good. His children and grandchildren accumulated a shopping list of honors, which include 7 individual or team state championships in track and volleyball, and 14 all-state selections, with 6 of those being first-team nods. That's not too shabby by any measure. I went to see him in early 2020, a few weeks before he passed away. And during one of our chats, the subject of the Hall of Fame came up, and I told him that we were going to get him inducted. In his typically wordy fashion, now pay attention so you don't miss this, okay? In his typically wordy fashion, he said, "Thank you, that's nice." Is that true? And then, he always had a way with words. Then he paused for a moment and nodded and said, "I belong there. I deserve to be there." And of course, here we are tonight. So for my dad, tonight, this moment actually began back in the spring of 1952. It has taken 72 years to come full circle, and now he has completed his journey. He has finally made it home. When I began a few minutes ago, I said that my dad loved Columbia High School. And tonight, thank you to Columbia High School for loving him back.